Every time I hear Brian's presentations, they always make me a little bit nervous because it really highlights just how fast things are changing in our industry. So every year there's new ways for all of us to access media, new platforms, new apps, more choice, and we're all taking advantage of that choice. So every year, attention spans get shorter as our media options multiply, and it gets harder and harder to find and catch that elusive attention. I'm as guilty of it as anybody. So I actually, on most online videos, you can increase the rate at which they play back. So in order to cram more media into my day, I've been watching videos at accelerated speeds. So people usually think that's a little strange, but if anyone else thinks that sounds like a great time-saving life hack, 1.5 times speed, totally fine. 2 times speed, everyone kind of sounds like a chipmunk. So there's definitely a sweet spot in there. But that's just a symptom of the way things are changing for consumers. It's a scary time for all of us trying to figure out what to do and where to spend. It's a scary time for brands who aren't sure where their customers are consuming media and what the best way to reach them is. It's a scary time for publishers who aren't sure what the best way to stay relevant in this shifting landscape is. And it's an especially scary time for us at MAGNA because we're supposed to be able to tell you what's going to happen in the next year. So this guy is me most days, looking at all of our data, trying to figure out what it all means. So in this kind of environment, what do? How do we figure out where everything's going? Well, it helps to go back to basics and remember that spend is going to follow eyeballs as long as the infrastructure is in place to support ad spend. So we all know intuitively that that's how things should work, but sometimes it helps to see that it's happened in practice time and again. This is a recent example from 2012, the average consumer's media day. It was about half television, some PC, some mobile, some print and radio. But when we look at how brands were spending against that, we see that one thing immediately stands out. And it's this, the mobile block with 14% of total consumer attention, but just 2% of budgets. So we saw that consumers had changed their behavior, but was the infrastructure in place to support changing ad spend? 2012 was a big year for mobile advertising. You had the introduction of Facebook Mobile. Publishers really started to embrace responsive web design, so there was a lot more and better mobile content. And average mobile internet speeds in the US more than doubled to support streaming and a higher quality experience. And what we saw over the coming years after that was that brands piled into mobile opportunities in search, video, and social until that gap between attention and spend had closed. So again, consumers changed their behavior, and the infrastructure was in place to support a shift in spend. Now, let's fast forward to today. We know that the symptoms of the way consumer behavior has changed. Average broadcast ratings have been cut nearly in half over the past 5 years. TV is more cluttered and fragmented than ever. The average number of ads a viewer sees on linear TV is up 30% since 2000. And streaming is starting to represent a significant portion of TV viewing, more than 10% today. So put that all together, and this is what we get. This is 2018's average media day. Less TV, a lot more mobile. But again, what's important is to look at how this compares to the average way a brand is spending. And again, one thing immediately stands out as a big divergence between spend and attention. And it's this, on-demand TV, with 10% of total consumer time, but just 1% of advertising budgets. So now that we see that there's this divergence between attention and spend, what do we think is going to happen? Well, brands that are approaching video holistically in this environment are using a two-pronged strategy to stay effective. First, they're maximizing their impact on what attention remains in linear television through addressable advertising. And second, they're regaining those lost consumers and extending reach with OTT. So we see that there's a shift in consumer behavior, that brands have engaged with this new TV viewing landscape. But importantly, is the infrastructure in place to support that shift in spend catching up to time spent? Well, let's take a look. First, this is total linear addressable homes available in the market today. So by the end of 2018, there will be 52 million total homes with set-top boxes that are connected to be able to provide addressable advertising. On the OTT front, as Brian said, there are over 70 million connected TVs in the marketplace at the moment, and that's on top of those 50 million standalone OTT devices. When you put everything together and roll up the various technologies, what we see is that on top of those 52 million standalone linear addressable homes, you can access an incremental 18 million homes through VOD. And there's an incremental 14 million OTT homes on top of that. So those 14 million are homes that no longer have a pay TV subscription of any kind. So that's 84 million total households that are connected with the technology to support this new video viewing landscape. So the short answer is yes. The infrastructure is there to start to support a shift in spend. And when we look at that spend, what we see is that addressable and VOD this year will represent $815 million. That's up 25% year over year, and it'll pass the $1 billion mark next year as we see a continued penetration of addressable set-top box technology and a continued increase in average campaign size. On the OTT front, we see even more spend, nearly $2.2 billion this year. That's up 40% year over year. And even though this is spend and viewing on a TV screen, that growth rate rivals anything we see in digital advertising. Now, for a little context, addressable 815 million, OTT 2.2 billion. How does that $3 billion of total spend compare to the total TV viewing marketplace? Well, local cable is a $5 billion market, local broadcast a $16 billion market, and national TV is a $42 billion market. So $3 billion is big, it's growing fast, but there's still a long runway. But that gap definitely closes with each year. Now, a lot of times we talk about only high-level theoretical stuff, but sometimes it helps to get the practical boots-on-the-ground view with what's happening in the market. So we know OTT is the biggest portion of this new viewing landscape. We know it's the fastest growing. And within that, as Brian said, Roku is the leader in time spent with 30% of total OTT viewing. They also have an install base of over 19 million subscribers. So here's where I'm going to pass things off to Andrew, who's going to go through some of the new technologies and capabilities that OTT brings to the marketplace, what that looks like to consumers, and what impact it's ultimately having.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. My name's Andrew Conroy. I help lead the upfront partnerships over at Roku. Excited to be here, especially with this prime positioning post-coffee break, so hopefully everyone got their fix and can stay awake for the next 12, 13 minutes. So Luke did a great job painting this picture of this evolving television landscape. I want to take those trends, those drivers behind those trends, all of that data, and put it in context from an activation standpoint. How can we help brands find this new TV viewer that simply is no longer reachable via those traditional linear channels? So the three topics I'm going to touch on today, first just talk a little bit about our audience and really the value that we have in owning the entire platform. Right? Our tech stack includes everything from building and owning the hardware, licensing our operating system to power televisions, having economics built with every single content provider on our platform, and lastly and most importantly, all of the data that surrounds all of this. Right? Registration data, PII that helps anchor all of our targeting, all of our measurement capabilities. And then get into those measurement capabilities and give you some real-time examples of what we're seeing in the market, what we can provide, and help answer a lot of these questions that still need to be addressed about the value of OTT. And then lastly, David mentioned earlier that we're no longer looking at 728 by 90s, 300 by 250s. Creative is evolving, right? And these next generation ads on television, 6-second spots, interactive video is now accessible on that large screen. We also have a unique proposition when it comes to using our content providers, aligning it with the brand voice, and natively integrating that brand into the experience. So I'll give you a couple quick examples there. So one of the most surprising realities when it comes to Roku's audience is that we mirror the US Census through and through. We are not just geographically located in those bi-coastal, tech-savvy cities. Right? We don't only reach that 18 to 34 audience. We mirror that US Census from a demographic, geographic, household income, ethnicity standpoint. The only component where we do not mirror the US Census, hopefully this isn't shocking news to anyone, is cable subscription statuses. Right? We're seeing right now about 3/4 of the US is still paying for cable television. On our platform, within our ecosystem of our 19 million users, it's less than half. Meaning that 55, yes?
Does this include the new TVs that have your operating system?
It does. Yeah, this is everything from the boxes, the sticks, and those televisions as well, which I'm going to briefly touch on in a bit. So 55% of our audience make up those cord cutters, those cord nevers. One of the most interesting groups of an audience that I don't think really gets enough attention these days are those light TV viewers, right? Nielsen identifies those as that bottom tertile of overall viewership. We like to equate that to the more trendy term, the cord shavers, right? These folks have a cable subscription, they're paying for it, but they're slowly tapering off the viewership and in the investment. Now, within this 45% of our audience that is paying for cable, 3/4 of those are light TV viewers. So again, when you think about a platform to find this new TV viewer that no longer can be reached on linear, we have 75% reach of cord cutters, cord nevers, and light TV viewers. Now, instead of just saying, this is where the consumers are going, yes?
But how does that compare, if you have that information, to the other manufacturers, whether it's Amazon Fire Stick or Apple TV, things of that nature? Can you repeat the question after you said that?
Yes. How do those numbers compare to the rest of the competitive marketplace, Amazon, Google, Apple? We don't have those exact numbers. We only have access to what they make public. I can say that predominantly a lot of cord cutting is obviously a trend throughout these all. The smart TVs, the Samsungs of the world, is where we see much less streaming, and they still do have cable providers. It's really the sticks and those boxes, those plug-and-play devices, where we see predominantly cord cutting. So instead of just saying it's a necessity to be here, this is where you have to be to find that new TV viewer, we want to prove out the value with some real-time measurement capabilities. We've been working tirelessly over the past 3 or 4 years to integrate with all of these popular, reputable third-party brand measurement study partners. Now, these are measurements that you historically could only get through digital channels, and now we have the ability to give brands these insights on that big screen in the living room. Historically, when you think about video, when you think about TV, it's really that upper funnel branding play. Right? And that's really what has helped us tap into the TV market, having an integration with Nielsen, and being the only OTT platform that can offer a Nielsen audience guarantee. Right? Nielsen is actually using Roku's registration data to build out the DAR methodology for the rest of the OTT landscape. Very similar to how they used Facebook registration data back in the day to build out OCR. We love our acronyms in this industry. We have been working very hard to meet the marketing objectives of not just that upper funnel, but the marketing objectives throughout the entire funnel. So that includes things like ad effectiveness, lift in awareness, lift in consideration. Are we actually using exposure and tying it back to visitation at a brick and mortar location? And then lastly, what is the ROI? right? And whether that's using a Nielsen Catalina, whether that's working directly with a brand and doing some kind of closed-loop attribution, we now have a solution to address all of these KPIs that brands are looking for. So putting this in a real tangible light, I'm going to run through a couple of case studies that we've done, not just looking at the third-party brand measurement studies, but also some of the proprietary solutions that Roku has been promoting over the last 6 months, the majority of which MAGNA has partnered with us and allowed us to bring these beta opportunities to market. The most recurring theme in every meeting we have is this notion of incremental reach. Right? TV buyers are constantly asking us, when we get to that point of a diminishing return, will that last dollar work harder for me if I shift it over to OTT? Right? We listen to these market needs, these market hurdles, and we're using our data to help quantify what incremental reach looks like. From a planning perspective, this is what we call a fluidity analysis that we've created. A constant question that comes up is, hey, we have these TV buys, and there are fluidity extensions, meaning we will have presence on other platforms, right? So the digital, the mobile, the desktop, and these OTT places as well. So what does that mean for brands? How can you deduplicate these audiences? We ask brands, give us your network, give us all your TV buys, tell us which of those are actually running this fluidity analysis where you do have presence on all of these other digital properties, and let's ensure that we deduplicate these audiences by blacklisting them and still giving you an idea of what that incremental reach looks like. So this was a beta study we ran with a CPG brand at MAGNA, and we found that of those 10 networks, predominantly TV Everywhere channels, a few OTT exclusive channels, 64% of our overall audience were not being exposed to those channels. Right? And we always like to say, these networks that create awesome content, they are the livelihood of our platform. That's what gets people on board. That's what drives all of this growth. We never want to cannibalize that business. We are a complement through and through, and this data really proves that out. From an engagement perspective, we're looking at 83% more hours streamed by Roku users outside of those Fluidity TV Everywhere channel buys. Now, I mentioned before, we really do want to address every KPI throughout this funnel. Finally ran our first Nielsen Catalina study. It actually just ended a couple weeks ago with MAGNA, another CPG brand, and we found that at $1 million investment, the sales return was $1.2 million. So a great story for Roku, a great story for the brand. That basically backed out to almost a $21 sales per 1,000 impressions, which is significantly above the NCS norms by about 13%. Right? And this is on television. This is no longer just that branding vehicle. We're proving that there's a tangible ROI component to this offering. We also get a lot of insights in terms of targeting. When we talk about these emerging platforms, right, when mobile first came out, sometimes that audience, your qualified consumer on mobile, may look different than that qualified consumer on desktop. Same from TV to desktop. A lot of brands are curious, is that same target the same person I want to reach on mobile, on OTT? This brand in particular has always been pretty honed in, knowing that their target was families, households that have children present in the home. And this proved out and justified that targeting. Those specific targets, 66% more likely to buy after ad exposure. Let's get back to incremental reach. This is our favorite study and really is what has been taking off over the last 6 months or so. So we worked with MAGNA in Q4 for this beta opportunity, and this is looking at post-campaign analysis. Let's actually finally quantify what that incremental reach is. So we mentioned before that we are embedded in smart televisions. Right now, 1 in every 5 smart TV in market is powered by a Roku. Essentially, we license our operating system, and we now power the connectivity behind brands like Sharp, TCL, Philips, RCA. 10 brands right now on board, and this is a huge priority for us moving forward. So what we can do with this, why does that matter for you? ACR technology. All of our TVs have ACR technology embedded within them. The way we position this for consumers is very strategic. We obviously want folks to opt in. We don't want to get sued. And the way that we do position it basically translates to roughly a 97% opt-in rate. So again, high opt-in rate, 20% market share, and all of this, again, is tied to a device ID. We own the hardware. We're powering this television. Right, so now we can now look at linear viewership and deduplicate that exposure from what we've run on Roku. Where's the crossover? How can we separate them out? This particular brand that we ran, this is a gaming brand targeting men 18 to 34. And we found just in the Roku buy alone, 87% of the users reached for this campaign did not see the ad on linear television. Right? That's a big number when you're thinking about how do we reach this new TV viewer. And this is consistent with every single campaign we've run since. Again, 75% plus of our overall audience are cord cutters, cord nevers, light TV viewers. So it shouldn't come as a surprise. Now, when you take that number and put it in the grand scheme of the overall video buy, Roku alone was exclusively driving 7% incremental reach. Obviously, not the TV budget overall, so with that smaller budget, we can still drive significant reach on top of that existing buy. So the last thing I'm going to quickly run through are some examples of how we're starting to think about creative outside of just your 15s, your 30s, your pre-roll, your mid-roll. We have channel relationships with every single content provider on our platform. We help promote their content. We help drive downloads. We develop their audience. And in return, we figure out economics on the back end, rev share, inventory share. And through that, we have this unique access to certain partners who want to promote content and allow consumers to discover content, access content that normally they would have to pay for. Creating a value exchange for consumers is what we found really drives brand sentiment. What do consumers want on our platform? They want content. So if we can find a way to give them this content and align a brand with this surprise and delight moment, consumers love this. So this is an example of an execution we ran with an auto brand at MAGNA. This auto brand was live in the summer and what they consider the off-season for TV. They still wanted to align with premium content, and they also wanted to get consumers excited for a lot of these shows, which are...
Is this our turn?
Oh, sorry, I thought that was someone else talking. This is the commercial. I don't know if I can mute this. There's a mute button. So by aligning with these shows, we created a summer binge guide. Again, giving this value exchange, saying, hey, consumers, this brand is going to offer you this binge guide and help you discover some awesome summer content to binge. The content that aligns with the brand voice, the brand message, as well as the content that we found triggers high viewership during that specific season. The most interesting things that I believe about these executions, tying this in a weirder way back to incremental reach, that banner on the home screen is the only disruption in the user flow for consumers who are just watching the subscription channels. Right? So many consumers are just going on to watch Netflix, and there's really no way to reach them. This is that only disruption. And what we found is that consumers who are only watching Netflix, HBO, Showtime, those subscription channels, are much more likely to engage with this brand. They simply don't know that this content exists, and Subaru in this example is helping them find it. So the last I'm going to run through quickly right here, this is my favorite. We just finished up this campaign with BMW, and BMW offered users the linear release, premiere release of season 3 of Billions. Obviously, Showtime is a network where they don't offer any ad-supported content. This is the kind of programming that brands always want to be around. They simply don't have access to it. Again, because of these channel relationships, we're in a unique position where we can say, Showtime, if you allow us to unlock content for subscribers who may not have access to Showtime, we're going to prove that on the back end. Teasing that content out will translate into an uplift in subscriptions for the brand. So Showtime is willing to work with us. BMW is actually really strategic about this because they do have presence, in-program presence throughout this show. So great extension. We already have that in-product placement. Let's extend it onto OTT and offer targeted consumers an opportunity to watch this free in front of the paywall. So the best results that we found here, 55 minutes total on average, 55 minutes on average spent within this one experience. So really proving out that the value we're giving consumers is wanted and people are taking advantage of it. I'm going to hand it back over to Luke here.
Great, thank you. So just to leave you with some key takeaways, again, to remind you, we see on-demand TV as one of the largest growth opportunities, and we really expect that 10-to-1 attention to spend gap to close rapidly in the coming years. Within on-demand television, OTT is the largest portion, it's the fastest growing, and we continue to expect it to bring digital advantages to the TV ecosystem. And finally, it's just important to remember that consumer attention and eyeballs really dictate where spend goes in the long run. They've embraced this new video landscape, so spend cannot help but follow. And just to leave you with a clear illustration of the growth gap between what we see in OTT and what we see in linear television.